Thank you so much for joining the Georgia Center for the Book here on Zoom for another author presentation during this time of a global pandemic. I am so thankful that you are allowing us to come into your homes, into your living rooms, sharing your evening with us. As you know, we are part of the DeKalb County Public Library System. It has always been a very active and passionate part of our literary community. And we as a library system are trying our utmost to make sure that you get the same quality of services that you did before we began to shelter in our homes to keep not only ourselves safe, but our loved ones safe as well. So just a few house cleaning notes for this evening. I would like to thank, of course, the DeKalb Library Foundation. They are the fundraising arm of our library system that go out into the community and raise funds that the tax base doesn't cover for programs like our 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten, our Take Our Internet Home program, and they are paying for us to have Zoom this evening to allow as many people as possible to see these presentations that we will be continuing to do for the foreseeable future. But also, if you are not a member of the DeKalb County Public Library, seek out your own local library system and see what they're doing right now. So many librarians are being so very creative and trying to reach community members. Our library system alone, we're doing yoga classes online, writing classes online, and we do have staff members who designate a part of their day to go in and sign people up for temporary library cards. So you can access all of the online services that we as a library system have to offer, including Hoopla. I'm not exactly sure what that does. It does something and people get very, very excited about it. So it's probably something good like Netflix, I'm going to guess. Allie will tell me about that later. Allie is our technological guru. Although I have a lovely backdrop, she's the one that makes a lot of this stuff happen because I just press buttons. A few upcoming events that we have on May 7th, we will join with the Decatur Book Festival and Acapella Books to present a series that is curated by Jocelyn Jackson. She was scheduled to present a series throughout the Decatur Book Festival, and we're doing this portion online. And she is going to be in discussion with debut author Ginger Eager on May 7th. Do look on our Facebook page. We have a link to where you can sign up for that. Also on May 28th at 7:30, we will be presenting the Biennial Townsend Prize for Fiction. This is awarded to a Georgia author whose work of fiction has been judged the best in the past 2 years. We have a wonderful slate of nominees, including Tony Grooms, Sonia Kamal, Anissa Gray, Jessica Handler, and we will be awarding that, of course, via WebEx. And you'll find more information about that on our Facebook page as well. As far as tonight's event goes, we are using Acapella Books as the book supplier, and you can give them a call. You can order online. They are mailing books out to folks. They are doing local delivery for folks, like so many of our wonderful independent bookstores, trying to keep you all in the literary loop. And I will tell you to seek out your local independent bookstore. Things change daily, but most of ours in Decatur, like Little Shop of Stories, Eagle Eye Books, Karis Books, they're all doing books by mail, curbside pickup, free local delivery, and it's a wonderful way to support local businesses in our literary community. So on the technological side, I mentioned that Allie was, of course, running this ship for us this evening. I'm just providing the lovely hospitality. So from Allie's desk, she wants to remind everybody that probably the best way to view this program is by viewing it in speaker mode. So on the left-hand side of your screen up at the top, if you turn it on speaker mode, you will of course see the two presenters interacting with each other rather than these sort of little blocks of all of our floating heads right now. Also, just as a courtesy, go ahead and mute yourself. That way it'll also keep the background noise down during the presentation. For the question and answer period, once the formal presentation is done, we're going to use the raise hand feature. For many of you, it will be under the 3 dots on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can just raise your hand. Allie will go ahead and recognize you all for that. Give her a minute because we can only see so many faces on a screen, so she has to scroll. But she will find you and you will get to ask your question as well. Also, as another courtesy, we all have the ability, but let's refrain from sending an instant message to any of our presenters this evening, just to keep them in the mood and focused on what they're doing. Also, as far as recognizing you for your question, Allie has said that however you signed in is how she will probably see your name appear on the screen. So if you have named your iPad C-3PO for some Star Wars sci-fi reason, we will recognize you as C-3PO. It's not a slight, it's just how computers work these days. Once again, I am so pleased to have our two authors with us tonight. It has been one of the great joys being the director of the Center for the Book, working with so many authors over a long period of time. And one of them, of course, has been Tina McElroy Ansa. She has been on the advisory council of the Center for the Book and just a wonderful guide and a light in so many ways to all of us. She is an author, a publisher, a producer. She's the best-selling author of The Hand I Fanned With and Baby of the Family. She has also been, of course, the author that has been honored with the Georgia Literary Festival in Macon, Georgia. So would you please join me to welcome this evening, Tina Ansa.
Oh, hi everybody. This is my third Zoom, I think, and I get more excited with each one. The woman to my right, I hope she's to my right here, is the person who got me on Zoom and got me connected. And she is our focus for the night, and she is Wanda Smalls Lloyd, the author of Coming Full Circle. It's very interesting that I had the joy of being on the journey with Wanda with this book. But Wanda Lloyd is an established, noted journalist. I'm thinking of her now in her professional side as far as to her personal side and things that I know her. She was just last August inaugurated into the NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame, which she should have been. When Wanda, where we met at Spelman College, came to Spelman in 1967, two things that she said she wanted to be was a working journalist and also the editor of a mid-sized town. Not a big town, not a small one. But what she didn't include when we were talking about this back in the 60s was that she was going to go on not only to do those things by being the editor of the Greenville, South Carolina newspaper, and also the Montgomery, the Montgomery Advertiser. Yeah, I just thank you, Advertiser. But in between, Wanda had a real journey from not just Spelman, but from Savannah, Georgia, during Jim Crow, before desegregation, all the way to the highest halls of journalism, dealing with everybody from the president, down to her pastor, who was very proud of her in her home church of Savannah, Georgia. Wanda and I have known each other for 50 years, and I've been on this journey a bit with Wanda. I want to say just a little bit. Wanda's been thinking about doing this memoir for at least 10 years. And because I was one of the ones telling her, you really should write this memoir. And she'd say, oh, well, what am I, I've done some things, but you know what? And I wanted so to impress upon her how her story was going to affect her.
Oops, was that the cat?
That may have been, I think so. I think the cat, the cat dropped, no, okay. But anyway, that was that was Bubba probably, excuse me. But not only did she have a real story to tell, but she also had so much to impart to people who did not know about Jim Crow, who did not know about little black girls who who had never really interacted with grown white men and face to face, shoulder to shoulder. I mean, this is an interesting and involved and current story for people who want to know what it was like before and what it took to get through desegregation, to get through Jim Crow, to get to where she is today. But anyway, she's my friend. I've known her for 50 years, I want to introduce her. Wanda, you are a really shining light for so many people. And I'm so glad that I get to share this book with you. We want to
Well, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see so many of you. Some of you, I recognize some names. Some of you have been on this journey with me, and I'm glad to meet some new people. So it's really good to be here. What Tina did tell you is that we were roommates at Spelman College, and that we, I've been supporting her as a writer all of her writing life also. So I'm really honored that she agreed to write the foreword for this book. This is the book Coming Full Circle from Jim Crow to Journalism. And so you really, when you get the book, you really have to read the foreword because it's one of the most beautifully written, I won't just say forewords, it's one of the most beautiful pieces of writing that I've ever read. I wrote this book not on the urging of friends like Tina and also students in my program at Savannah State University, who would ask me about my background, because when I came to Savannah State, after I retired the first time, I've retired about 3 times, but after the first retirement, I went to Savannah State as chair of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communications, and they would ask me about my journey. They would ask, they knew that I hadn't been in the academy, had not been at the university very long, that I had done some other things in my life. And as I explained to them my journalism background, then they started asking, well, where did you grow up? And I told them Savannah, and they thought, well, why would you ever leave Savannah? And I explained to them that I grew up in the Jim Crow era, and that when I was in high school, quite frankly, I couldn't wait to leave Savannah. Not because it was just Savannah, but because of the experiences that I had growing up in the Jim Crow South. And I took a lot of that baggage with me as I went to Spelman and then went on to my career. So I tell a lot of the stories in the book, starting with the Jim Crow years and describing my family. I grew up in a very supportive family, a well-educated family. I say at the beginning of the book, this is not a poor me story. It is not a raise yourself up by the bootstraps. I grew up in a middle-class family. We owned businesses. There were teachers in my family. And so it was no surprise that I would grow up to be a good reader and a good writer, because that's something that was a very strong value growing up. But I still brought along with me some of the baggage of not interacting with people who were not African American. Everyone in our neighborhood was African American. Everyone we saw, the doctors, the lawyers, the pharmacists, the people who, the mail, people who delivered the mail, there were no white people that came into our community or that we would go outside of our community, except to go downtown, you know, shopping on Saturday, we would interact. But even then, the Jim Crow laws dictated where we would go, how we would go, when we would go, where we went to school, what kind of books we had, what kind of materials we had, how our teachers were educated. You know, we had teachers who were educated for the most part undergraduate at historically Black schools in the South, mostly Georgia and Florida and South Carolina. But then when they went on to get their master's degrees, they went to New York University and Columbia University and University of Pittsburgh and just all over places in the North. And when I started digging into the story to find out why they did that, I found out that there was a law that, you know, obviously separate but equal, but even before Brown versus Board of Education, there was a law that compelled the state of Georgia to educate our teachers on the graduate level, which meant that they would send them to states outside of Georgia. So they could not go to the University of Georgia to get their master's degrees in education. And so they would pay for them. Their transportation was paid for, their tuition was paid for, their, you know, meals and other things were paid for. So they were sent out of state and they had wonderful educations. So I would not say that I had a bad education, but I would say I felt like after I graduated and met other people, I would say I had a substandard education. And by that, I mean, we got secondhand books. We had furniture that had been used before. We were not able to go to some places in town that other students were able to go to. And even at the times when we go places like the symphony, when they would have a symphony day, there was a Black one and a white one. So what does that all mean for me and my journey? It means that when I went into my first newsroom in Providence, Rhode Island, I didn't know how to talk to people. I was very, very quiet, very, very shy. I was not shy in college because I was around Black people in college, but I was just really stunned to be sitting in a place, in a copy desk, if you can imagine, it's literally a desk. It is one big space where a lot of people are sitting, and we're editing copy and writing headlines and selecting pictures and yelling across the room that we need this, somebody to come get the copy or somebody to bring us a cup of coffee. You know, it's a very tight space. But in downtown, people would talk about downtime. People would talk about what they had for dinner. They were talking about meals that I wasn't familiar with. They were talking about the movies that they had seen, the books that they were reading. And these were things that were just different. And so I felt like I had to learn to become bicultural. And I did. And I had to listen a lot. I didn't talk a lot, but I did listen a lot. I worked for 7 daily newspapers in my career, and so this book is full of stories from every step of my career and every city I lived in. And one of the things that I write about in the book, and I discovered in my own reflection, was that I faced discrimination outside of the South. And so I write in the book that I was no longer in the South, but I felt like I was in the South. For example, I write about a time when I went to look for a place to live in Providence, Rhode Island. My mother and I went together, and it was difficult for us to get into an apartment because once they saw us coming, doors were shut. People would keep out the blinds and things like that. So I want to start this evening by reading a story. And it's one of my favorite stories to read. It's a family story, and it kind of describes Jim Crow in a way that's, you know, hopefully not a sad way. You need to know this first, though. When I talk about my family, I call my grandmother Mother because I thought my grandmother was my mother. I call my mother Gloria, her name, because she was young and she was kind of hip and she was so beautiful, and I thought she was my big sister. And so I always called her Gloria until I got to maybe college. And I call my Aunt Catherine, who raised me, Aunt Catherine. That's my mother's sister. But Aunt Catherine's husband, who also raised me, who was my Uncle Osi, I called him Daddy because I did not grow up with my biological father. I never really got to know him. And so I figured I needed a dad, but I didn't need a mother. And so throughout my life, I called one Aunt Catherine and the other one Daddy. And so this is the story about...
Wanda, can I just say one thing?
Yes.
That I kind of would like for you to address is that we were talking earlier about the intersectionality of this book, of race and culture and journalism and all the rest. But I'd also like for you to touch on how you sort of dug into your family, because it's not the kind of book that you intended writing, but it's to me, such a richer and deeper book because you did the work. You looked internally. You talked about your family. You said things that might have not been family secrets, but were private things. Can you just talk about that just before you read a little bit?
Well, I don't know a particular story that you're thinking about, but I did have to sort of think about. I did write about each family member separately. I wrote about the women in my family. I wrote about the fact that my grandmother and her sister were educated at Spelman College. And so I was a third generation because my aunt graduated from Spelman College in 1936. I wrote about the fact that my mother left me when I was probably before age 5. She left Savannah for a job. She went to New Jersey, and then she lived in New York and Dallas and San Francisco. She worked for the Army and Air Force Exchange Service, and that was really the only company she ever worked for. But she really probably was compelled by her mother to leave Savannah because my mother was a badass. I called her Badass Gloria. She'd take stuff, She was not down for Jim Crow, and I'm sure that she would have gotten slapped or kicked or worse if she had stayed in the Jim Crow South, because that just wasn't something that she was comfortable with as an adult. And so she left probably when she was in her early 20s. And so
I always refer to her as Gloria, as glamorous Gloria, because I met her at Spelman. And when she came through, honestly, she was the first Black not businesswoman, but executive that I met. And she had on a beautiful wool suit, tweed suit with a fur collar. And she just sort of swept in, and she had this wonderful red hair. And she was on her way to Europe. And I was like, oh man, really? And that was Wanda. That was Wanda's mother.
My mom was a buyer, a retail buyer for the Army and Air Force Exchange Service. So if you can imagine, for example, during the Vietnam War, she was a toy buyer. She had the second largest toy budget in the world after Sears and Roebuck. And so she pulled a lot of weight wherever she went because she had the money, the company's money behind her. And so this story really is about my mother. She came to visit, and she often came to visit, and she just happened to be home on this day when this incident took place. When I was in about the 4th grade, I got an inkling of why my mother, Gloria, had to leave Savannah. She had moved with a job transfer, but she was clearly not comfortable with how things were in the South she left behind. I had worn glasses since I was 7, and one of my mother's trips back to Savannah coincided with an appointment to pick up a new pair. I'll take her, Gloria said to Aunt Catherine, when Aunt Catherine told her we had the appointment. No, let Kat take her, my grandmother said. I would soon find out why. I wanted my mother to take me. We didn't spend a lot of time together, and I wanted to have her all to myself. After all, we were just picking up glasses. No big deal, I thought. When we arrived at the doctor's office and got out of the car, we walked toward the perfectly symmetrical building that had 2 front doors. I held my mother's hand and led her to the door on the left. We entered a crowded, tiny waiting room with every seat taken. The room was hot and stuffy, full of drab furniture and less than pleasant decor. All of the patients and the people waiting with them were Black. My mother walked up to the reception desk and looked through and across the office area where she saw another, more spacious waiting room with more pleasing decor. Without a word to the receptionist or to me, she grabbed my hand, marched me out of the door we had just entered, and briskly led me to the other door. We are here to pick up glasses for my daughter, she told the woman at the reception desk in the nicely appointed white waiting room. I recall the audible gasps at the audacity of this Negro woman and her child standing in the room reserved for whites only. Girl, you have to go to the other side, to the colored side, a woman behind the desk told my mother, who was standing there in her sophisticated northern bought clothes and high heel shoes with her perfectly coiffed dark red hair, bright lipstick, and an attitude. No, Mommy, don't do this, not here, I mumbled softly. Gloria looked down at the fear in my eyes and she told me to sit down. Each emphasized word was its own sentence. She politely asked the woman who had just called her girl to explain why we could not sit in the nice, spacious room where the air was better and the decor was up to date. Is the price different? She asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. By now, I wanted to hide under the chair in which she had just ordered me to sit. After a couple of minutes of making a scene, which included my mother telling the woman behind the desk that she lived in the North, and a retort from the woman, something like, we do things different down here. We were ushered through a door into the area with examination rooms to wait for our appointment, firmly pushed ahead of Black and white patients. When we were done, my mother firmly grabbed my hand again and walked me back through the white waiting room and out the door to the street, new glasses on my face. In the car, she admonished, don't you say a word about this to your grandmother, just between us, okay? We never spoke of it again, but to this day, when I pass that building, which is no longer a medical facility, I remember when my mother ordered me to sit down in the whites only waiting room. So that's just a story that I wanted to tell that story, which it has a bit of sadness to it, but I didn't want it to come off as sad. I wanted it to, to be easy to read, but also to understand, what life was like when you live in a society where you're told, you know, that you have to only go to through a certain door. You had to wait in a certain, and that the conditions are substandard. So I hope that helps you understand that situation. I think you're muted, Tina.
Do you find that a story like that seems otherworldly to younger readers, or have they heard about that? Do they know about Jim Crow? I mean, is this, what kind of reaction, you know, are you getting from the story from that standpoint?
Well, when I was talking to my students at Savannah State University, when I was a professor there, and I started talking about Jim Crow and explaining that that was the reason that life was different for me then, many of them asked me, well, what is Jim Crow? They really didn't know what that was. And it seems almost like in education, we're teaching, the students were learning about slavery and Reconstruction, and then it went to the Civil Rights Movement. And there was this whole period of time that was skipped over in classrooms, at least. That's the first thing. And the second is that parents are not really talking about this with young people. It was very clear to me that they were not having those conversations. Or if they were having those conversations, they didn't name it Jim Crow. And so it resonated with a lot of the students who, of course, asked me, well, when are you going to write some of these stories? Because these seem interesting to us. But I will also tell you that I was on book tour before we got shut down, of course, with COVID-19. And I was at a university in Tennessee, and I did a book talk about coming full circle. And there was a gentleman, a faculty member at a luncheon.
Sally, know what's going on?
It must be something on her computer.
It stopped. Make a quick call. Does she know?
She probably needs to, yeah, you want to text her or call?
No. That's a good idea.
She probably knows. It's probably just her computer froze.
Oops.
Technology issues.
Here we are, huh? Oh, she's all okay. If she's gone, she'll come back. No.
She will come back.
Wanda, you're muted.
Got it. So this gentleman who in a small town in Tennessee said, I knew that we had separation, but until you had this conversation with us, I didn't know what it was called because my parents never talked about Jim Crow. We didn't know, in fact, I didn't even know the law until you came here to talk about this. So, you know, it's resonating with people of all ages, but young people are appreciating the stories as I talk because I have actually gone to several universities and the questions and all the stories because I've been going to the Department of Journalism and Communications. And so the young people are doing video, they're, you know, doing a video of my presentation, they're writing stories for their school publications, and they are really having to grasp the concept of Jim Crow. And of course, they're also resonating with my stories about journalism.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a good segue into what I wanted to talk about. We have such a short time, and you have such a big career. But what I wanted to talk about, get into the journalism part, because that really was what I've always thought of is sort of your lifeblood. I always thought you had, you know, ink in your blood. You came to Spelman wanting to be a journalist, knowing that you were a journalist, having been a journalist in high school. Tell us about not only what formed you in that way, but what kept directing you in journalism, what kept saying to you, oh, I am a journalist. This is right. This is the right path.
Well, you're right. I did come to college, to Spelman, knowing that I wanted journalism as my career. I took a class in journalism in the 11th grade. I was in, I guess you could say, on a college track program in my high school here in Savannah, and was taking, you know, some heavy courses in chemistry and math, and I was looking for, and you know, I love the writing courses and the English courses, but I wanted to find something to kind of balance some of the harder courses that I was taking in the 11th grade. And so I just thought, you know, what about journalism? That sounded like a fun thing to do. Now I have to back up a little bit. This isn't exactly journalism, but maybe it is. I grew up in a funeral home. My dad was a mortician. And so I really started writing obituaries at the kitchen table when I was about 15 years old. If
It
you
truly was your first job in journalism.
it was my
like
first
for
job.
most people.
Yeah, and I didn't get paid money, but you know, I got a meal, 3 meals a day. But if you look if you see on the back of the book, there's a little typewriter. Here's the camera. There's a little typewriter here. That's actually the typewriter that I typed the obituaries on. That typewriter is in my living room right now on a shelf. So, you know, I really got to start with that there. And if I back up even a little bit more, because I did not live with my mother, I wrote letters to my mother all the time. And she would mark them up with red pen or pencil and send them back to me. And, you know, I had to correct all the mistakes and I had to rewrite the letter. So if I had a single error in a letter, she would correct it and I had to write the whole letter over again. So I might have gone through 2 or 3 drafts every letter. So those are sort of the things that were the foundation for me writing and doing, you know, understanding formats and things like that. But in terms of the journalism, this class in the 11th grade, at the end of the 11th grade, my journalism teacher suggested that I should be the editor of the Beach Beacon, our school paper, in my senior year. And so she said, I recognize in you not just your ability to write and to report, but you also seem to be a leader on the newspaper staff. Other students are coming to you with questions about their stories, about sources, about how do you do this, about story ideas. And so that was really the very first time I was an editor of a paper. And then I went to Spelman and ultimately became the editor of the Spelman newspaper as well.
Yes, indeed. You're Wanda smiling because she, although we were not roommates after our first year, because like she liked hot and I like cold, she liked spicy and I like bland. I mean, you know, she made her bed every day, and I thought, what the heck? Why are you making your bed? We're just going to get back in it probably this afternoon. I mean, we were complete opposites, but we really bonded over writing and over. She had an electric typewriter, which really was, you know, something everybody didn't have, or students didn't have in 1967. But we did bond over journalism, and we became, you know, continued to be friends all the way through. And in my senior year, Wanda, who was the editor of the school newspaper at Spelman, the Spotlight?
Spelman Spotlight. Mm-hmm.
Spotlight, okay, great, I remember that. Marched into my room that was in another dormitory and said, Tina, you said you're always talking about wanting to be a writer. You know, the way Wanda walks in, flat-footed, bam, 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 and you know, oh God, what now, Wanda? I call her a fire starter too. But she walked in and said, this is in our senior year. Wasn't it?
Junior year.
In our junior year. She marched into our junior year and said, you know, you think you're a writer and talking about that's what you want to be. You're on the staff of the school newspaper. And of course she shamed me. Wanda's good at that. She shamed me and said, so you know that is right. And so I really realized when Wanda was writing this book that she's the person who set me on the road to journalism, because I went there thinking I'm going to be a writer, you know. And everybody kept asking, well, you know, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to be a writer. Well, they said, yeah, but what you going to do? So Wanda is the person who got me what you going to do. And it was a wonderful, wonderful world she introduced me to. But I didn't realize that until you were writing the book. So you're responsible.
Yeah, and you have to understand, we both went to a college where there was no journalism. I went to Spelman knowing that there was no journalism. In fact, I wanted, and I write about this in the book, I really wanted to go to the University of Georgia, which was still, had just been integrated by Charlene Hunter, and I've forgotten the other gentleman's name. And my family said, no, we don't want you to go to University of Georgia and be a martyr. We want you to go somewhere where you will get a good education. And of course, you know, because it was a family school, it was the only school I applied to. And so Tina and I took our journalism classes across the street at Clark College. You could actually get credit for all your classes at the other schools in the Atlanta University Center, Morehouse and Clark and Morris Brown and Spelman. And so we took all our journalism classes over there and worked under the tutelage of a very, very fine gentleman who had been, I think he had been a copy editor at the paper in Memphis, Tennessee, and then he took some time and got his master's degree and came to Clark College. He was a white gentleman, who came to teach these young Black students. And I will say that everyone, I mean, a lot of us ended up at some significant roles in journalism because of his mentorship of us at Clark College.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. And because I was in Atlanta, as a matter of fact, he invited me back to teach a couple of courses. I was on the copy desk at the then the Atlanta Constitution. He kept that kind of circle going, because now that I think about it, I met a number of journalists in college. My first real journalist through him.
Right.
Socially.
And you know, that's something significant that I read about in the book. There were no mentors for us in journalism in the South. You know, I don't remember a woman being on the staff at the Savannah newspaper, except maybe in the feature section. And there certainly were no African Americans. And so a lot of people ask me, how did you have the audacity to even think about journalism when you really didn't see anyone who looked like you who became a journalist? We had the Black press, but I'm talking about in daily journalism, daily newspapers, local television. There were no African Americans and no women on the air on television. Yeah. I doubt that there were any women behind the camera on television in the 60s. And so it really was a leap.
You know, we forget so much, and how things have changed over a short period of time. Exactly. And how drastically that it seems like another world. So many things seem, and that probably is how your students look at Jim Crow.
Yeah, that's true. But you know what it did? Having no mentors and no one to look up to, it forced me as a journalist in the industry. And I know this would have happened if I had gone into, I don't know, engineering or, you know, some other career, but it forced me to say to myself, I'm going to devote my life to becoming someone who will support other women and other people of color getting into the business. And so I spent a lot of my time, and I write a lot of stories about this, I spent a lot of my time in developing programs to bring people of color and women into the process. And I write about something called a seat at the table, and how important it is for those who have a seat at the table, and how important it is to aspire to have a seat at the table, because leadership is where you have power. And it's really incumbent upon all of us who eventually get a seat at the table, you know, as Shirley Chisholm said, you know, bring a folding chair, or I say pull up a chair for someone else. Don't just sit there and have all that power yourself, but you really need to help work on the pipeline and bring other people along. And those are some of the stories that I write about in the book. I write about my time in the American Society of Newspaper Editors, which is the organization of the top editors from throughout the country, and how I chaired the diversity committee, and how I learned programming, that is how to put on programs for these big conferences that we had, and to make sure that every program had diversity on it, that at least a woman or a person of color was on every panel, that among all of the plenary speakers or the big speakers, we at least had one or two people who were not white and male, because most of the editors, I think we had, 1,700 newspapers at that time. We have probably half that many now, daily newspapers. And I'm gonna take a leap of faith that if 1,800 members of ASNE, maybe 5 or 6 were African American in 1989 when I joined the organization. It got better, but you had to understand, you had to qualify. You had to be a top editor or executive editor or a managing editor in order to join. And so part of what I made it my business to do was, one, to educate newspaper executives about the importance of diversity and why they need to hire more people who look like me. And number 2, to help encourage others in the business who were sort of in that mid-level to reach higher so that they could become top editors. And, many of them did and led the organization. I'm really proud of some of the work I did to encourage some of them to get on the ladder to become president of that organization.
Well, Wanda, as you think about it, I mean, of course, you and I make our living with words. We always have, and ideas. But what higher level can you be at than at the editor of a newspaper that decides what people see every single day you know, as they pick up the newspaper, as they walk past a newspaper box. I mean, that's real power, because newspaper words do change people. Images do change people.
Words and images. You know, it was things like having something we call a diversity audit, and making sure that we don't just have negative stories about people of color, but there are positive stories, making sure that people understand how to find diverse sources. And sources means, you know, I don't know, if there's a, let's say you have a plane crash in your community, if you always call a white pilot or a white aviation professor at the university, there are people who are not white and male who could be a source to say what kind of plane it was, or, you know, what kind of fuel, how much fuel they probably had, or why they were flying so low. So having these conversations at the newspaper level to help editors understand that people who read their product or watch their television show who are not white and male will appreciate understanding that we care about what we think we know too, because there are a lot of smart people who are women, and a lot of smart people who are people of color.
And also, you know, there's a good deal of talk now about being seen, you know, and that but I think people of color understand that a lot more than, you know, than the others. That idea of being seen, of being heard, of being responded to, you know, I mean, it indeed, it does make a story. It does make a difference that, you know, that for this story, the pilot that they chose to be the authority was somebody of color.
Yeah.
You know?
And speaking of being seen, there's also a story that I tell. I left Atlanta. I went to Providence, Rhode Island. Then I went to the Miami Herald. And then I really wanted to get back to Atlanta and work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, because I just wanted to be back in Georgia. My Aunt Catherine, by that time, had lost both my grandmother and daddy had passed away. And I just knew that she was in the state by herself, and I was in Miami, and I was young and single, and was, you know, it was okay, but I really wanted to get back to Atlanta, because that was kind of the happening place, and Tina was there also. And so I tell a story about how I got a job at the Atlanta Journal. But before that, when I was in college, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had a foundation that, the Ralph Mcgill Fellowship, that they paid for part of my tuition. And when I was about to graduate, I had done an internship in Providence. I did an internship, and they offered me a job to come back. And then, you know, I was in Rhode Island from Georgia. And I thought, you know, there's no way I'm ever going back to Providence, Rhode Island. That's just not happening. And I was there in the summertime, so I can only imagine what the winter would be. And so when I was about to graduate, I went to the Atlanta Journal and spoke to the editor and told him that I had, you know, I'd done all this stuff. I showed him my resume. I had an internship. I was editor of the paper. You know, I had good grades in outstanding grades in journalism. And I wanted to work. My dream job is to work at your newspaper. And he said, okay, that's fine. We'll hire you tomorrow. We'd love to have you as a reporter. I said, well, no, my internship was as a copy editor. I really want to be an editor. I don't want to be a reporter. And he told me that he could not hire me as a copy editor because this was, you know, right at the end of the civil rights movement. He said the community, the Black community in Atlanta, has been urging them to hire more Black reporters. And if you are on the copy desk inside the building, no one will know you're here. And
as we know, the copy desk is a seated one table. It is a powerful position. It was, you know.
It's a powerful position because it's where it's the people who decide how stories are, you know, the editing process, but also where stories go, which stories go on page one. Sometimes you're deciding which stories go in the features section, whether you can bring a sports story out to the front section, and the stories on page one.
You sometimes write the cut lines, the pictures,
right?
You all know could be
select the pictures, and you write the captions to the picture. So it's a powerful position, and it's a position that I wanted because I had done this in Rhode Island in my internship. And so I did not go to work at the Atlanta Journal. I went to Providence, I went to Miami, and then I ended up coming back and asking for a job, and I got a job at the Atlanta Journal. In fact, I think I slept on Tita's couch a few nights while I was waiting to get an apartment in her same complex of apartments. But I also read about the fact that it was the worst job I ever had. I did not like working at the Atlanta Journal because there's a term that Mr. Bustle at Clark College taught us called shoveling copy. That is, you just read it real quick and you slap any old headline on it, you just shovel it out, and you read another story and you shovel it out. And we were reading too many stories too fast on the copy desk where I was. Now, you were in the Constitution, Tina, and you were in the feature section also, but on the news copy desk, it just was not a good, I wasn't learning anything, and I wasn't able to share what I had learned at previous papers. And so I read a lot of little stories. Someone, a reviewer said, coming full circle is hundreds of stories about, Wanda's career and her life. I don't know, I didn't count them. I don't even think the publisher counted, but there are a lot of little stories that I put together and tell different stories about different periods of my life.
One of the things that I really loved when I talked earlier about you writing a straightforward sort of journalism, this was my life book, and then decide, we talked about it, and you decided you wanted to dig deeper and do these. Well, to me, those are the kinds of stories that that you're just talking about, that people don't know about how scary it was to be the only one in a newsroom, about being the one of the going down to the copy
The composing room.
Which
Yeah.
everybody, but before everything was done, digitally, the composing room was just what y'all, if you ever saw a composing room in the old movies, it was chug, it was noisy, and it was loud, and the guys down there, because of course they were all guys.
All white men.
Guys, exactly. They were
Older white men.
oh my goodness. Yeah.
I mean, we were 20-something, but,
real Georgia white men. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it was the same in all of them. I tell the story in the book about a incident at the Washington Post. My first job was as a production editor in the composing room with all these older white men who.
You want to read that story, Wanda?
I can read it. I don't have that one marked, so you have to give me a second to find it.
Okay.
Because I was going to read a different one. And
okay,
someone just sent me a text message and said, "Will we get a chance to ask questions?" So I'll just say right now, yes. Okay, so let me just tell the story about the composing room. I'll just tell you briefly that it was a situation where I had to lean over the pages to show the compositors, the printers, sometimes people call it, what changes needed to be made on the page.
They want big
chases, big lead. We're talking lead type. And in leaning, I realized after the first day that I always had to wear pants. That's the first thing, because I'm down in this dungeon with all these older white men. And second, because as I leaned, sometimes people would brush my behind, just walk very closely behind me. We didn't have a name for it then. It was, clearly it was sexual harassment. I never complained to anyone. I never told my boss in the newsroom about it. I didn't even mention it to my husband. I had been married 2 weeks when I started at the Washington Post, because I married someone who lived in Washington, and so I moved up there for the job. But that was my first brush with sexual harassment, but not understanding. But I overcame quickly. I stayed there maybe a month, and then I went back to the newsroom and told the news editor that I had to get out of there. I did not tell him why, but I just said, I just need to be in the newsroom, not where you had placed me. This story.
Excuse me, Wanda, I said something about it on the copy desk when it happened to me, and all I got was like the men on the copy desk were all embarrassed, but it didn't go any further than that.
Yeah.
It wasn't a real, like you said, it didn't have a name. It wasn't. It's just.
We didn't have a name, and also it wasn't just there wasn't a lot of the physical. It was a lot of it was they would talk about women, disparaging comments about women.
Stories they would tell. Yeah.
Their wives, their girlfriends, the woman they saw on the street. It wasn't necessarily about my body that they were describing, but I just felt uncomfortable because they're telling me stories.
Stories about pubic hair. That's
just stupid stuff like that. So I had to get out of there. So this last story, before we get to questions, I guess, if Tina wants to go that way, is a story about, I was the senior editor at USA Today for about 10, I worked at USA Today for 10 years, and I was the person who ran the news meetings at USA Today. I was in charge of what would go on page one. So if you can imagine this big conference room, a table with the editor from sports and money and news and life, and the photo editor and the graphics editor and the executive editor. I was the senior editor, so I was number two.
Let me tell you, my girlfriend had a corner office overlooking the Potomac, a bathroom, full bath and shower, and her assistant had an assistant. Okay,
yeah,
she was, when she said she was running the day.
My assistant did have an assistant.
And she walked me, and I had a new book out, and she took me by the arm and walked me upstairs to the publisher to say, "Hey, sign this book for your wife." Don't you remember? You just
I do remember.
And I got a great piece in USA Today.
Yeah.
My friend's always been there for me.
We try. So this is a time when I was getting ready for the afternoon news meeting, and I had spent, the better part of an hour reading the wires and talking to the individual editors in the section. So I always come into the meeting with a plan. I know what the plan is, and the purpose of it is so that we can share the plan and everybody can hear what everybody else is doing. And so I was about to get up and go to this meeting in the afternoon, which was right down the hall in my suite of offices. And I got a phone call, and this is about that phone call. It's not very long at all. I didn't recognize the caller ID.
Wanda, can you hold the book up a little bit so we can see your face while you're,
Yeah, okay.
Just a little bit. Don't cover your face.
Yeah, okay. Maybe I should put my readers on too, but I don't know what I did with them. I say I always had, I always wore glasses, but after cataract surgery, I only have to have readers now. So I'm loving not having to wear glasses. I didn't recognize the caller ID, a number from the local 703 Virginia area code. When the desk phone rang, I had already risen from my office chair, standing there in my proper business suit and high heel pumps, supporting dancing feet that were ready to race down the hall to the conference room to sit at the head of the table and lead one of the daily USA Today news meetings. I was always keen about getting into the room before the meeting time, aware that my leadership encouraged others to take a seat so the meeting would begin on time. The director at my daughter's summer camp was calling me. "Mrs. Lloyd, I need to share something that happened with Shelby today." My heart raced, fearful that my 5-year-old daughter had fallen and cracked open her skull on the Alexandria campus, or she had run off from the grounds and the police were looking for her, or worse, she had drowned in the pool. Although the last fear was probably not the case, because when she was 2 years old, I made sure to enroll Shelby in swimming lessons through her daycare program. By the time we called all the kids out of the pool today, Shelby had dropped her towel in the water, this director told me. The children take a rest and quiet down on their towels after pool time. Shelby asked one of the other little girls if she could share her dry towel. The little girl told Shelby no, because she said, "My granddaddy said I can't let Black people touch me because the black might wear off on me." My mind, now far away from the urgency of the news meeting going on down the hall without me, struggled to process what I had just heard. The black might wear off. I repeated into the phone, not just to say it to the camp director, but to myself. Stunned, I walked around my desk and closed the office door. Someone else would leave the meeting. My silent tears were starting to fall. I was angry that I had lived through the Jim Crow years when we were told when, where, and how we could exist, had survived the humiliation of being called nigger, of being spat at, of living a dual life of the best Black this and the best Black that, not just the best at something. I had grown up in the South, where we were never surprised in the 1950s and 1960s to hear some dumb stuff about what white people thought about us or said out loud to us, or denied us the right to be to the best education or careers or neighborhood amenities. Here I was, more than 20 years after leaving the Jim Crow South, and some white grandfather had instilled in one of his own that my child was a danger to his child because mine was Black. I was not mad at the child. It wasn't her fault. And I was not mad at the director because she told me the child, the daughter of a camp employee, was immediately sent home for the day after she was confronted with the reason why my Shelby was left standing, crying by the pool because this little girl had denied sharing a towel. Shelby was not old enough to understand the racist statement, the black might wear off. Shelby was likely just not happy that someone she probably considered to be a friend had denied her the opportunity to share her towel, her space, although Shelby's lesson clearly was to be more careful with her own towel from now on. But as my fingers swept away my own tears, I recognized that I had to go home that night and explain to my daughter, as best I could explain it to her, the lesson this little white girl had learned from her grandfather, someone who was probably still steeped in the racist behavior of his own ancestors. I had not imagined that I would still be dealing with this kind of racism directed toward my own child. Now I fear that Shelby may someday have to deal with racism with her children and her children's children. The thought angers me to this day. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think now we're going to open it up to questions. Did you want to add something, Wanda, before we open it up to questions?
Well, I would just like to say that I hope the questions will show that you were, I want this book to inspire people. I want it to inspire people to do several things. I want it to inspire young people to be supportive of other people, and I want to inspire people who are older to be more tolerant to people who are not like them. I want to inspire people in business to understand why it's important to have a variety or diversity of people in their organization from top to bottom. And I want to inspire people in my generation to tell their stories, because we know that a lot of young people don't even know the stories of their grandparents and their own parents. And so I really want to inspire us to tell our own story, people of my generation to tell our stories.
So important, so important. I agree. All righty. Joe, are you going to take over with the question?
Yeah, so don't forget to use the raise your hand feature, and Allie will recognize you all. Give her a second so she can scroll and see who has their hand raised, so you can ask your question in turn. And if that won't work for you, just go ahead and use the chat feature and send us that question, and we'll make sure it gets asked in the conversation.
Can we just raise our hands?
Well, the electronic raising of the hand.
I don't have one. I don't have one. Does anybody else? Does everybody else have one? Everybody has one?
It seems like
no, everyone does not have
I see a few.
it.
If you don't have it, you can either put your question in the chat, or you can, if you have the reactions, you can turn on the thumbs up. I can see that, and if you can leave that on until I call on you, that would work too.
Okay.
We have 2 raised hands right now. As Joe mentioned at the beginning, I can only see you by what you signed in as. So the first one is from iPad.
Oh boy.
That's me.
Okay, thank you.
Hey guys, this is Shelby. The one
Hi.
I wrote about, read about.
I survived. Cool incident.
What's your question?
Okay, Carrie has a question. He wants to know what city was the city that you learned the most in, or the paper that you learned the most in?
Oh, I would. It's a toss up between USA Today, and the reason I learned so much at USA Today is because it was such different journalism. Through the Washington Post, it was very traditional journalism, and then when I went to USA Today, it was shorter stories and a different way of writing, a different audience, because quite frankly, a lot of the papers went to people who traveled or people who had lived somewhere else. It was not a local paper, and so I learned a lot there. But quite frankly, my last newspaper, where I was executive editor, the Montgomery Advertiser, because I was the top editor, and it was not an easy job, especially being a Black female top editor in Montgomery, Alabama, which is self-described as the cradle of the Confederacy and the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement. And so those two cultures were clashing even in the year 2004 when I got there, and I was there until 2013. So I learned a lot. And what I learned mostly in Montgomery was more leadership than journalism, because I had the journalism. It was just the leadership that I was challenged with in some cases. Thank you for your question.
Okay, we did have one come through on the chat for us, and this is from Michelle Nicole Johnson, and she asks, as someone who has been writing a book forever, what made you start writing? Also, I admire both of you so much, and I appreciate this opportunity to see you both together.
Well, you know, when Tina embarrassed me after about 5 years and said, are you writing yet? Are you writing yet? Are you writing yet? Are you writing yet? At some point I had to write. So when I left my last job, my last newsroom job, I thought I was going to start writing. And then I got a call from Savannah State University and I ended up coming. So that was kind of a distraction, but I was still putting the ideas down and, you know, working on what I was going to write about for those years that I was at Savannah State University. When I left Savannah State, I really had the time to jump in. So it took me about 3 years to do the writing and another year maybe to get it published. So, you know, I had the support of a writing coach and Tina to just get it done. Let's get it done. And you know, something else, I want to say this quickly because it goes back to something that Tina said earlier. When I sent her the first couple of chapters, they were very dry. They sounded like, you know, they sounded like the journalist that I am. And I remember Tina saying, okay, these are very nice, but you're writing like a journalist. I want you to stop it. You're now a nonfiction narrative. And so I had to learn how to be a narrative writer instead of being a journalist in terms of the writing.
The best student yet. Wanda is the kind of person, and I'm a writing coach, where you just have to just touch her, like a I guess a horse, you know, where I've read about horse race, you know, and the horses where you just have to sort of touch them and nudge them just to that side a little bit, and they go, no more. I know exactly what we're doing now, and that's Wanda. You know, you nudge her to sort of with a new idea, and she's gone with it. Next thing you know, you're getting 2 new chapters.
Awesome. Okay, we have another hand raised that's been up for a while. Monica Diggs. Monica?
Hi. I have a quick question. First of all, Tina, I love you. I met you years ago at the National Black Art Fest here in Atlanta. You're such a joy.
Thank you.
Wanda, I have a question.
Looks familiar.
We are a couple of years apart, maybe 10 or 12. Providence is my home. So when you mentioned it, I was tickled. But I'm curious, where were you when you were in Providence? Where were you working at? I'm trying to put some.
I was working in the Providence Journal building downtown.
Okay. What year was that again?
I went there in 1970 as an intern in the summer, and then I went back in 1971 right after I graduated from Spelman, and I stayed 2 years. I left in 1973. And I lived in, just so you know, if you're from Providence, I lived in the University Heights apartment.
Oh, okay.
Where that is on Brown Hill.
Okay, I just thought when you mentioned, I'm going, she has such a disdain for my state. That's interesting. No, but it is a very interesting place to live. I have Southern heritage. So Dad was military. So when you were talking, I could put all of it together as to why you found Providence to be a very interesting place to live, because it is. Even now, it's still an interesting place to visit.
It was I call the Providence paper a good teaching, you know, like you've heard about teaching hospitals.
Yes.
Where people can really learn. The paper was like that. It was a very supportive environment. And I tell a lot of stories about living in Providence, including one of the first lessons I got, which was on the first ice storm that I encountered in Providence. And I went to my car and I kept slipping and sliding because I didn't have the right clothes. I didn't have any boots with traction on.
Yes.
And I slid down the hill, literally fell a couple of times going down the hill to my car. And I got to my car and it was iced over. I couldn't even get the key in the door. I didn't know what to do. Nobody had told me to use hot water. I couldn't see through the windshield. So I went back up the hill, got back to my apartment, called my news editor and told him that I was not going to be able to come to work. And because I was iced over. And a few minutes later, he called me back and said, look out your window. There's a taxi. Get in.
Exactly.
There's no excuse for not going to work. But I tell stories like that in the book.
Savannah.
Thanks.
Thank you for your question.
Excellent. So we have a few in the chat room, but I think, Rosalie, did you have your hand raised to ask a question?
I don't have my hand raised because I have technological problems and you can't see me. But I'd like to ask a question.
Sure.
This is Llewellyn.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Wanda.
Hey.
Your line sister.
Yes.
It's Charlene Hunter Galt. She lived around the corner from me. She lived on 71st Street when I lived on 70th Street. But beyond that, what kind of progress do you hope to see in the future?
Well, Charlene and let me just say, Charlene and I ended up working together. I worked at Columbia University one summer. I was teaching in a program for minority journalists, and she was on the faculty with me that summer. So I got to spend some time with her. I think the future journalism is, it's changing. A lot of it is digital. And so, but here's the thing, the foundation is always going to be the same. Good writing is good writing. Understanding news is understanding news. News judgment is really important. All those foundational things are important. Once you get that foundation, you really can adapt to the digital, especially young people, because they were born with, cell phones in their cribs, I guess.
Exactly.
So they know how to, they know how to work the digital. And I'm still working with young people. I lecture at Savannah State. I go to other college campuses. I am still talking to young people on the phone. They find me online. They call, they ask if they can call and have a career chat. And I just always urge them to have the good foundation and then to look for opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities out there. A lot of people say news is going away. I'm no longer working in a newsroom, and every day I get 4 or 5 or 6 jobs that come to me in email just because the people who are hiring still know that I am in touch with young people. So I'm hopeful for the future.
One of the things that Wanda and I have been talking about is that you reach a certain age and you know so much. You don't know everything, but you know so much in your certain categories. And we've been talking a bit about doing something digitally, doing something, whether it's a podcast or something that we can codify all the information we know about, just about corporate America, to say nothing of journalism and writing and all the rest. I think that would be a really great idea to use, especially during this time, to use the basics of what we know about journalism, to adapt to the quote unquote new world, which is not much.
Right.
There's not much of adaptation, because I think the basics are always there. I agree.
Yeah.
I do. There's a lot to learn about corporate America. Please.
Allie, I see a question from Patrice. Can I answer that one?
Oh yeah, go right ahead. That was the one was up in the queue.
Can you go ahead and read it?
Sure. So Patrice Gaines asks, you mentioned learning a lot about leadership in Montgomery. What did you learn? Considering the reputation of Montgomery and you being a Black woman, I'm very interested in knowing this.
So Patrice and I worked together at the Washington Post. We overlapped a little bit, and we've known each other a long time. There was a lot of skepticism about me when I went to Montgomery, being a Black female. So the white community felt like, oh my gosh, we're losing our newspaper. And they literally said this to the publisher and to me and to other people. This used to be our newspaper, and it's no longer our newspaper, because diversity was something that I was increasing. I won't say I started it there, but I certainly was I was hiring staff that were women and people of color. I was bringing people from the outside, because Alabama is really kind of a closed community, and they like people from Alabama, but I hired people from all over. There were traditional things that were in the newspaper. For example, they still celebrate Robert E. Lee's birthday in Montgomery. And so every year they would call demanding that we send a photographer over so that we could take a picture of the birthday cake. And at some point I just said to the photographers, not taking that picture anymore. He's been dead a long time. We're not doing that anymore.
And they lost their minds, right?
And I guess they're still celebrating it. It was one couple that Colonel something. I believe he thinks he is still in the Confederate Army, although he was not born at that time, but I'm sure he knew his grandfather who was in the Confederate Army. I write in the book about, walking down the street and seeing people in the Klan who had on the full white uniform and the hat. And the thing that stunned me the most, two things stunned me. One is I pulled out my camera, I guess at the time, maybe a cell phone. This was a few years ago. And I took a picture and I'm standing there as they're walking maybe 6 feet away from me, passing me. And they didn't seem to mind that I was standing there taking pictures. They didn't, give any reaction. They didn't say, no, don't take our picture. The other thing that I remember about that incident was how they had children with them, and the children had on so they were going to some kind of Klan rally. They were still having Klan rallies. And so that was a challenge for this woman, African-American woman, to be the editor in the paper and ultimately pretty much decide what goes in the paper and where it goes in the newspaper. And so that was the challenge being the editor. I write in the book about a situation where I was racially harassed by an individual through a series of emails and how I reacted to that. Fortunately, I had a very supportive publisher in that incident. So I learned a lot in Montgomery about leadership because I had to lead a team and not let the team know that these things really got under my skin. That, I would just say, okay, this is what it is. Let's figure out how we're going to handle it. So that was my Montgomery experience. It was a good experience. I got to do I won't say preach, but I got to be the main speaker at the Dexter King Memorial Baptist Church, standing at the podium that Martin Luther King preached from. I got to sit at the desk where Martin Luther King wrote his speeches. They took me to his office that Sunday morning to sit and wait for the service to begin. And people would come in and bring me water and flowers and things like that, and explain the history of this church in a church that I had visited a couple of times right after I got there. But it wasn't well attended because it's one of those city churches where the Black community had migrated to the suburbs, so there weren't a lot of members. But that Sunday morning, because they heard all over town that the Black female editors of the Montgomery Advertiser is going to be here, it was packed. There were people standing along the walls, and it blew my mind. So I write about things like that in the book.
Excellent. Well, we have one more question from the chat, and it's probably a great question to end our evening. And it's from Sharon White. And she asks, when was your last newsroom job? And what do you think of all of the many changes in the industry?
Well, my last newsroom job was executive editor of the Montgomery Advertiser. So I sort of just talked about that. The changes are interesting, I will say. I won't say all good or all bad. The digital is really the future, and that is a change. In terms of, what we, newspapers have changed a lot, and consider that newspapers are digital now. I mean, that's really the strength of newsrooms, and we don't call them newspapers. They're really digital. Every newspaper has a website. So that's where the news goes first. And hopefully with most traditional newspapers, there's accuracy. What bothers me sometimes is the cable news, partly because of the format that they use, which is they're not just giving us the news, but they're pontificating. They're giving us their opinions, or they're bringing in all these people who are giving us their opinions. So, I've got to get with this new generation because, we grew up in the time when Walter Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley, or whatever their names were, would sit there and just tell us what happened. And you form your own opinions. And now we have newscasters telling us their opinion. Even the newscasters that consider themselves anchors, people like, on the CNN and MSNBC, I won't call any names, but at some point during their presentations, they will tell us how they feel about a certain thing. But let me just say this, it's compounded by the fact that we have a controversial administration, I'll just put it that way. So there's a lot of news to talk, a lot of stuff to talk about, and a lot of opinions to Yes, Tina.
all I wanted to say is, do you think the news has changed? And you just mentioned it because I think that at one time opinions were not a part of the news. I don't know, it was on the opinion page. But I think it's hard now to be a journalist and talk about the truth when the truth isn't being spoken. And do you think that it is the job of the journalist to correct?
Well, they're certainly doing a good job of fact checking, and they'll, after untruths are spoken by the administration, most of the time I do see the anchors either say it themselves or they'll bring in someone who's their fact checker and say, well, here's the real fact. Here are the numbers. Here are the statistics. So I think they're doing a good job. But it's also it's up to the consumer what he or she understands about the news and the way it's presented. And because we are so, there are stations that we might consider to be, liberal, maybe Democrat, or conservative, maybe Republican. People hear what they want to hear. They go to the news source that they feel more comfortable with. And so they don't get to hear the other side all the time. So it's really up to the consumer to understand what, to discern what facts are.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Tina. Thank you so much, Wanda. Is there anything that you all would like to leave us with this evening before I wrap everything up? Go ahead, Tina.
Yes. Wanda, what are you working on? Working on anything new?
I am working on something new, but I haven't run it by my writing coach yet. But it's a nonfiction book, and it's
okay.
I will say this: it's a book that blends family with inspiration for the millennial generation.
Oh, that sounds good. Okay. All righty.
Well,
we read that, huh, Joe?
we would read that. Absolutely. We're looking forward to it.
So,
and we just got another question in the room.
Patrice has her book. I see it, Patrice.
Excellent
question.
For those of you looking for copies of the book, we've contacted Acapella Books in Little 5 Points, and they are going to have copies in stock for you to order. They will either mail them out to you, or they are doing some free local delivery as well right now. So do take advantage of that. As I said in the beginning, support any of our local independent bookstores. They are really going above and beyond to help us all get through this. Once again, thank you, Tina. Thank you, Wanda. Thank you, everyone who decided to spend your evening with us, letting us come into your home. Don't forget about the Jocelyn Jackson event that we will also be doing with the Decatur Book Festival on May 7th. And on May 11th, we will also have Caitlin Curtis for her new memoir called Native: Identity, Belonging, and Rediscovering God. She is a member of the Powhatan Nation as well as identifying as Christian. So it's blending her Native culture with a Christian upbringing, and it's going to be a very, very wonderful event as well. Thank you all again. Please stay safe.
Joe, can I also say that I hope you all will follow me on social media, Wanda Smalls Lloyd on Facebook, and MGM Editor on Instagram and Twitter. And also, and I hope this is okay, Joe, but if anybody wants a signed copy of the book, if you go to my website, which is wandalloyd.com, there are directions there to get in touch with me directly, and I will mail books that I sign also.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
That's great to know, Wanda. Thank you all so much. Stay safe, and we will see you all again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful talk. Thank you. Thank you, Wanda.
And Wanda, if it's okay with you, I'll share that link to get signed copies with our audience.
Okay, wandalloyd.com.
Perfect. I'll share that in our newsletter tomorrow.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Allie.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Night, Tina. Have a good one.
You too.
All right.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you, Allie.